Thank you, Brian. In 1851, members of a California state militia called the Mariposa Battalion became the first white men to lay eyes on Yosemite Valley. The group was largely made up of miners. They had been scouring the western slope of the Sierra when they happened upon the Granite Valley the native peoples had long referred to as the place of a gaping mouth. Lafayette Bunnell, a physician attached to the militia, found himself awestruck. None but those who have visited this most wonderful valley can even imagine the feeling with which I looked upon the view, he later wrote. A peculiar exalted sensation filled my whole being and found my eyes in tears. Many of those who have followed in Bunnell's footsteps over the past 170 years, walking alongside the Merced River or gazing upon the god rock of El Capitan, have been similarly struck by the sense that they were in the presence of the divine. The Mariposa Battalion had come to Yosemite to kill Indians. Yosemite Miwok tribe, like many of California's native people, were obstructing a frenzy of extraction brought on by the gold rush. And whatever Bunnell's fine sentiments about nature, he made his contempt for those overgrown, vicious children plain in his words here. Any attempt to govern or civilize them without the power to complete obedience will be looked upon by barbarians with derision. The savage is naturally vile, cruel, and arrogant. He boasts of his murders and robberies and the tortures of his victims, and very much in the same he recounts his deeds of valor in battle. When the roughly 200 men of the Mariposa Battalion marched into Yosemite, armed with rifles, they did not find the Miwok eager for battle. While the Miwok hid, the militiamen sought to starve them into submission by burning their food stores, souring the valley's air with the smell of scorched acorns. On one particular bloody day, some of the men came upon an inhabited village outside the valley, surprising the Miwok there. They used embers from the tribe's own campfires to set the wigwams aflame, shot at the villagers indiscriminately as they fled, murdering 23 of them. By the time the militia's campaign ended, many of the Miwok who survived had been driven from Yosemite, their homeland for millennia, and forced onto reservations. So these are the opening paragraphs of the article, Return the National Parks to the Tribes, in this year's May issue of The Atlantic. The author, a member of the Ojibwe, David Lindsay, describes the motivation to create the national parks, to preserve a wild garden. The parks were intended to be natural cathedrals, protected landscapes where people could worship the sublime. But of course, these wild lands had been inhabited and managed by indigenous people for 15,000 years prior to the arrival of white settlers. In Trayer's words, the idea of a virgin American wilderness, an Eden untouched by human and devoid of sin, is an illusion, end quote. So what strikes me about the opening quote is a contrast. Bunnell, who is clearly awed and affected by the beauty of the natural world, is at the same time blind to the humanity of the native people who stewarded the lands for thousands of years. I think that blindness was rampant among the settlers and led to the displacement and genocide of indigenous tribes. My own history is connected to Yosemite through my mother's family. My maternal grandmother and her twin brother were raised in an inn that her parents ran in the small town of Bagby, which was named after my great-grandfather. This Bagby was located on the Merced River alongside the Yosemite Valley Railroad, halfway between the city of Merced, and Yosemite Valley. This was a narrow gauge railroad route built to handle the many twists and turns through the Merced Canyon that was a major entry point for tourists visiting Yosemite. The railroad ended service in the mid-20th century due to the mass production of cars and other reasons. The town of Bagby was eventually flooded, on purpose, by the expansion of the Exchequer Dam and Lake McClure, although you can still see the train depot when the reservoir water is low, like it is now. My mother was raised in El Portal at the western entrance of Yosemite and worked summers in the Yosemite Valley Post Office. I was born in Mariposa, less than an hour's drive from the park. Our family would go camping in or near the park nearly every year while I was growing up. Partly because of the depth of my personal history, it is very important to me to understand the true history of how the native tribes lived and how our government waged a campaign to remove them from their ancient homelands, and to destroy their language, culture, and way of life. This story of loss is staggering. It is estimated that there were 5 to as many as 15 million people in North America at the time of first contact, occupying the 2.4 billion acres that would become the United States. But by 1890, the population of indigenous people was only 250,000, and the reservation's land totaled 52 million acres, about 2% of the original total. The author describes how, in the latter half of the 19th century, the federal government policy was generally to kill and remove indigenous people from their homelands and force them onto reservations. Then, in 1887, the Dawes Act split the reservations into small homesteads so that they could deal with the native tribes as individual citizens and not sovereign nations. This act alone took 90 million acres of land from the tribes, on top of the hundreds of million acres that had already been taken. This is slightly more, the 90 million is slightly more than the 85 million acres within the 423 national park sites. Tricia goes on, quote, "We live in a time of historical reconsideration as more and more people recognize that the sins of the past still haunt the present. For Native Americans, there can be no better remedy for the theft of land than land. And for us, no lands are so spiritually significant as the national parks. They should be returned to us. Indians should tend and protect and preserve these favored gardens again." Unquote. Yellowstone Park, established by President Grant in 1872, is emblematic of the false history, violence, and land theft that are a part of the national park legacy. The false history claims that the native tribes never lived in the park and that they feared the geysers and other volcanic features. A recent article in Smithsonian Magazine, thank you, Matt, describes recent archaeological work that shows the natives have made extensive use of the obsidian, bison, and fish resources of the area for more than 10,000 years. However, a visitor to the park sees very little information about the indigenous history of the area. In Tricia's words, "Viewed from the perspective of history, Yellowstone is a crime scene." But besides the justice aspects, Tricia makes the case that the tribes can do a better job of managing the parks than the National Park Service. I quote, "The preservations of these sublime places for future generations is of course crucially important, something Native Americans understand as deeply as anyone. But putting aside for a moment the interests of Native Americans, and notwithstanding the hard work and goodwill of many park employees, the parks show worrying signs of mismanagement. Transferring the parks to the tribes would protect them from partisan back and forth in Washington, and the transfer should be subject to binding covenants guaranteeing a standard of conservation that is at least as stringent as what the park system enforces today, so that the park's ecological health would be preserved and improved long into the future." The article closes with this: "The national parks are the closest thing America has to sacred lands, and like the frontier of old, they can help forge our democracy anew. More than just America's best idea, the parks are the best of America, the jewels of its landscape. It's time they were returned to America's original people." So now I'd like to pause and open up this to comments from you all and people on Zoom. So I'd like you to address one of these questions. And we'll have about 10 minutes. So, if you can keep your comment down to like maybe 1 minute, and then if we have time, we could do, was it on? No, you have to. Okay, here are the questions. I got distracted. Okay. What is your reaction to this history? And what is your gut reaction to the proposal of returning the national parks to Native people? Do you believe that Indigenous peoples should receive land reparations? So, yeah. Who wants to, you can come up to the podium, or Myke can hand you the microphone.
I definitely have mixed feelings about turning the parks all over to the Indigenous people. Oh, sorry, it's Margot McCandless. So yes, I want to give it to them. Then I'm also worried about keeping access to my wonderful parks.
Yeah, I'm thinking, I'm Iris Craig, and I'm thinking they have the casinos. They have land already, and they turned it into casinos to support the people. Will that happen to our parks? Is that what's going to happen?
This is Linda. Because of the stated provision that they would have to stay protected, I'm not concerned about that. But I'm concerned about the reaction of the people that are so afraid right now and are reacting against progressive changes and what they might do if this happened. But I think it's very fair, and it's, like I've said before, it's a great fantasy.
This is Matt Metzler, and I just wanted to mention that most of us have probably been in national parks and admired the Rangers' classic Ranger uniform with those broad brim hats. And do you realize, I just want everybody to remember that when the National Park Service was first established, it was administered by the United States Army. And when they established the Park Service, they gave the Army, the soldiers, a chance to remain as soldiers or to muster into the National Park Service. And the original Rangers were all former enlisted in the Army, and they kept that uniform. And so that's a little bit of the history about why the establishment of the National Park Service is a history of military conquest of native lands, as we see as shown by the 1910 national or Army uniform that the Rangers still wear.
Hi, it's Joe Baylor. I recently was in Yosemite and realized that I really want to go there and volunteer for a month in the summer, so I joined the Conservancy, and I've been getting their publications. It is telling how much they are revising their literature and their signage, not only in terms of the Native American history, but also the fact that all of a sudden they discovered there was a Chinese laundry there. And we've ignored all of that. And so I think that anything that we do that changes our perception of what we did and how we can start to work together to keep these lands, all of our lands, not just the national parks.
Hi, everybody. This is May on behalf of Carol on Zoom. Carol says, very interesting idea. They would be far better at management for fire. Would public access continue? Would the road through Yosemite be closed?
Yeah, so actually, that is covered in the article, that it wasn't, they would be open to everybody. It would be open to the public. It's not like they would be only for indigenous people. That's the proposal. I didn't highlight that point. Thank you.
Craig, President Biden has already put Native Americans in responsible positions in the government. He's recognized that they can provide strong leadership, including leadership in land management and so forth. So I think the time to act is now. That it's urgent to act during the time that Joe Biden is there to support the whole thing, because I think he's very warm to the idea.
Anybody else? Can I? Yeah, okay. I just want to point out that this land was managed by the indigenous peoples in a much more intelligent way than we have managed it. So in California in particular, you know, they managed for the basketry that they did. They knew all the plants incredibly well. They really know what they're doing, and science is catching up with them. But so I think that, and they manage for biodiversity. We tend to manage for, oh, is that useful to us? They manage for biodiversity, plus some end uses too. But okay, that's all. Yeah, right. All right. So.
Okay, thank you, everybody. Yeah, I think it's a really provocative discussion topic, and kind of how do you make things right, and if anyone wants to discuss after the service, maybe we can join people on Zoom if they're interested. Okay, so let me end today by thinking back 400 years to the first Thanksgiving feast in 1621, While the gathering was peaceful, it was at best a token respite from the European settlers' colonists' genocide against native peoples that was already well underway. Quoting from a Democracy Now! Column, thanks, Susan. Quote, the myth of that abundant shared meal 400 years ago continues to mask misery, from poverty and substance abuse to the epidemic of missing and murdered indigenous women. But Native communities are resilient and organized and rising up in resistance. For this, we should all give thanks.
Once a month, once a month, our congregation donates our offering to a local organization that shares our values. Today, that organization is Puertas Abiertas Community Resources. Here to speak about the work of this organization is Blanca Huijon, the executive director of this great organization.
Good morning. Okay.
Very directional.
Thank you. So my name is Blanca Huijon. I'm the executive director of Puertas Abiertas Community Resource Center, and we are a nonprofit here in Napa, and we serve the Latino community. We're the safety net for our community, and okay, thank you. And then last year we served about 3,754. So we provide different services from educational programs to self-sufficiency programs, such as the financial literacy program that we have. So many of our families, they don't know how to put together a budget, how to save. Also English classes that we have. What else we have? We provide mental health services, and that probably is gonna be like why you guys focus on that if there is other nonprofits that also focus on the mental health component. But our mission is to embrace also the culture component. So we have both the mental health and the cultural piece that goes together with that. So with that, we also offer that our main focus right now is helping our community that have been impacted with COVID, that they have lost their jobs, wages. So just last year, up to now, we have served about 555 families with rental assistance and also food assistance. We just maybe take it for granted that we don't see that as many in our neighborhoods, but there are many families that have been impacted, and that this disparities has been existed for years, many years. So we have just been seeing that because of the pandemic, but those families, many families have been suffer for this, that they have these needs. So we also are focusing on the vaccine outreach, that we have gone to different neighborhoods like the low-income apartments, doing some educational about the vaccine. We also go to the Latino markets to table there. And last Sunday, we had a vaccine clinic, and it was amazing to see how our Latino community have trust Puertas. So we had a good turnout, and which was like walk-ins, and we had about 300 families. So that tells a lot how they trust Puertas, and they didn't feel hesitate. Even though before we had the clinic, they called to ask questions about the vaccine because they feel hesitate, like they don't have the proper information. Like there is many advertiser like TV, word of mouth, misinformation. So we are also helping with that. We help with immigration services. That is also crucial for our community. And then the other thing that we are helping is social services. We take it for granted that we know how to fill out a form for unemployment, right? And then, but they're not that tech savvy, so we help them to apply for unemployment, especially after the harvest season, for those people who work in agriculture. And we help them social security information applications, medical applications. So it just very like for social services. For the financial literacy piece, we work with women who work in agriculture, and it's been interesting to see them how we empower them to get more hands on their finances, how to manage more their money, not just depending on their significant other. So that's that, and I just can go and on and on. But I just wanna share a story that really just I just been carrying this since it's been a few months, 8 months. So we have a family that a couple that called Puertas Abiertas, and the second baby was born. He has a like this. I don't even remember the name of the ill. So they have going back and forward to San Francisco. And the newborn baby had some like a chromo something with his system. So they have to commute twice a week. Like the gas costs and other things involved. He had to lose, some hours of work. And besides that, it just impact them. Just with their income. So we have we have the funding to help them with the rental assistance. So I'm just giving you an example